Hi, I'm Laura Richcreek with Laura's Voice, and this is Laura Reads Foxed Books. Thank you for joining me. I am so glad you're here. This week, we'll read Chapter 3 of Thomas Nelson Page's The Old Gentleman of the Blackstock. This book and its illustrations are in the public domain. For your edification, I came up with a few more terms that may be unfamiliar from this chapter, and one reference to a beloved 19th century British poet, about whom you can read more in the episode description. Mom. To get to the episode description, remember to click on More just under the video title below, and that should get you there. If not, just text me. Without further ado, let's read Chapter 3 of The Old Gentleman of the Blackstock. 3. Basham Miles. I did not meet my young lady again for a long time, nor shall I pretend that all this while I cherished no other image than hers in my heart. I certainly carried hers there impressed with great clearness for quite a period, for I should say several weeks at least, and I always bore a sweet and pleasant picture of her, never wholly effaced, however much softened by the steadily intervening months. But I found after a time that there were other eyes besides hers, and that other girls wore roses in their hats and roses under them too. So that although at first I formed all sorts of plans, romantic and otherwise, to meet her, and even carried one idea so far into execution as to purchase a handsomely bound set of Tennyson to send to her anonymously, and mark one or two passages which described her aptly, and should compel her curiosity to penetrate my almost invulnerable anonymity, yet courage failed me in face of the questionable act of sending anything anonymously to a young lady whom I did not know, and after a few weeks I made another disposition of the poems, sending them without change of marked passages, and with a note which I considered quite fetching, to a girl whom I did know. Still, no serious results came from any part of this, and I applied myself somewhat more faithfully to what I was now pleased to call my practice, and never wholly forgot the old Hill and Dale carriage with the pretty faces laughing together out of the windows, nor became entirely indifferent to the memory of the little Hill and Dale lady of the big summer hat and the large sunny eyes. If I ever saw a pretty face with a rose garden above it, it was very apt to call up a picture of a milliner's window on a May morning. Or if I caught a glimpse of a pair of pretty ankles, I thought of a daintier pair, and a slender, girlish figure tripping with them out into the street. And once or twice things occurred to remind me strongly of her. Once when I saw in a paper a notice headed, "A pretty country wedding at Hill and Dale," my heart gave quite a jump into my throat, and when I read that it was the eldest daughter who was married and not the youngest, I was sensible of a feeling of relief. The sister had married an Episcopal clergyman, whom I knew by reputation as a fine, earnest fellow and a good preacher. The notice went on to speak of the well-known beauty of the sisters, all of whom had acted as bridesmaids, and it mentioned particularly the charming appearance of the youngest, Miss Elizabeth, whose character, it stated, was as lovely as her personal beauty might lead one to infer. The notice evidently was written by a friend. It went on to say that there was a rumor that another fair sister would soon follow the example of the eldest. My heart had another flutter and sinking at this, and I could have cursed the vague writer for not giving some intimation as to which sister the report concerned. Another occasion when I was reminded of the young lady was when I saw the published notice in a newspaper of the sale of the Hill and Dale estate under a chancery decree. It seemed that the old place had finally gone to satisfy long-standing mortgages and later debts accumulated through the years. This was later on, though. I had been reminded of Miss Dale occasionally in the interim. During the 2 or 3 years which had passed since my coming to town, I had formed many new acquaintances in the city, and made some friends. I had, of course, in this time not only learned the name of my old gentleman of the Blackstock, but had also come to know him personally. His speech to me on the street corner that May morning when, with my heart in my eyes, I was looking into the old Hill and Dale carriage, had excited me enough to make me take the trouble to follow him up and learn his name before my interest in the incident subsided. Indeed, my office boy, William Kemp, proved to be one of his old servants, and still waited on him. I found that he was Mr. Basham Miles, one of the old residents of the city, and owner of the ancient house and tangled yard at the gate of which I had first encountered him, and where he still resided when he was in town. He had once been a member of the bar, and had had the reputation of being very clever, very eccentric, and very proud. He lived alone when in the city, and took his meals at the house of one of his neighbors, an old lady, who lived next door but one to him. But he was away from town a good part of his time, both winter and summer, either visiting old friends in the country, summering at some of the smaller and more unfashionable watering places, or traveling. No one of my informants knew just where. He had had a brilliant opening at the bar, for he was the son of one of the big lawyers of his day, a man who had stood at the head of his profession and had died with what was deemed even better than a national reputation, a state reputation, and he himself had been in partnership with one of the leading lawyers of his own time, a man who had died the recognized head of the local bar. Old lawyers still told juicy stories of the ability and skill of Miles and Thompson, but he had suddenly given up practice, abandoned the bar, gone abroad, and dropped out. No one of my informants knew anything further about him, even if they knew this, for it was only by piecing together bits of recollection and of old tradition at second hand, or heaven knows at how many hands, that I got this much from the men of my own time. Of course there were other stories, bordering on or even touching the scandalous, echoes of old gossip so plainly pieced out and distorted that I will not even give them the currency of a denial. There was one unvarying suggestion that seemed to occur often enough in the reports of my informants to reach the dignity of what is known to the law as general reputation. This was that it was something about a woman. Some said about one woman, some said two, some hinted at even more. Some thought it was a scandal. Others said that it was a slander. Some only had an idea that he was crossed in love, and gave up, soured and disheartened. The more numerous part credited the first story. Men are always ready to believe a vague scandal of a man, though they may deny a specific charge. I was interested enough to investigate farther, for somehow the idea of associating the base life of a fribble or a debauchee with my fine old gentleman of the Blackstock, with his thin, high-bred face, soft and spotless linen, and kindly, firm, gentle voice, seemed too repugnant to entertain. His countenance was grave, it was true, but it was the gravity of one who had faced sorrow, not shame. His eye was melancholy, but it was calm, and his gaze direct. And his voice, which as much as either the face or the eye tells the true history that lies deep and unchangeable within, was grave and sad, but bore the unmistakable ring of sincerity and command. So unwilling to leave one who has somewhat linked in my mind with the object who at that moment engrossed my meditation, for I am speaking of the days succeeding the incident of the rose-filled carriage, I applied myself to the further and more careful investigation of these compromising echoes of vague tradition, and I learned that there was not one grain of truth in any story which imputed to the old gentleman the least act of dishonor, or cast the faintest shadow on his history. The 2 or 3 old members of the bar to whom I applied answered my opening question in almost the same words. I would ask them, "Tell me something of old Mr. Miles." "Miles? Old Mr. Miles? Basham Miles? What about him? He used to be a member of the bar and the best lawyer at it. He argued the case of Calthorpe against Brown. Have you ever read his argument? It's the greatest exposition of— Where's the report? Give me that book, will you?" etc. No, but why did he leave the bar? Was there ever anything, out of the way about him? Any sort of, about Miles? Old Mr. Miles? Basham Miles? Why, no. Who says there was? He was one of the highest men who was ever at the bar. He left the bar because, hunting through the book, he gave it up because, here it is. Listen to this. Why, he gave it up because he didn't need it. He had plenty of money without it. I'd have done the same thing if I'd been in his fix. I believe there was a woman had something to do with it. Jilted him or something, and he never got over it. Here it is. Reading, Calthorpe's executor against Brown's administrator and others. Listen to this. And then would follow page after page of clear, lucid argument, which only a lawyer would appreciate fully. Why, sir, John Marshall could not have beat that. He made the court reverse itself by that argument and established that for the law. "And I want to tell you that's not the easiest thing in the world to do, young man." This was what I got from 3 or 4 of the oldest men at the bar, and I stopped, satisfied. I had established the fact, which I had already believed, that if my old gentleman had dropped out, it was his own choice. End of Chapter 3. This has been The Old Gentleman of the Blackstock by Thomas Nelson Page, illustrated by Howard Chandler Christie. Original copyright 1897. This edition, copyright 1901. Production copyright 2025 by Laura E. Richcreek. Thanks for being here. See you next week.